I forgot to mention, next week we have a potluck meal here, and I know we're going to have visitors. It will probably be really filled up, but I imagine it will be an electric atmosphere. Okay. I'd like for us to turn over to 2 Kings chapter 2. 2 Kings chapter 2. What if, in the future, an angel delivered a special message to you and said, you have an opportunity to spend time with me, and the note was signed by God himself, and you were the person that received that letter, and the letter said, congratulations, you've been chosen for a lot of wonderful reasons. We've chosen you to spend a day with God. One-on-one. It's one thing maybe to be with a group of people and be with God, but to be alone, one-on-one, it would be more exhilarating than having a one-on-one experience with almost anybody else in the world. Some people thought, you know, if I could be Thomas Edison's assistant, wouldn't that be exciting to look over his shoulder and to see the experiments and the invention of the light bulb and so many other different activities that he does? Some people would love to spend a day with a special athlete. And yet there are other people, if I could spend a day with Albert Schweitzer, the famous doctor. But what about spending a day with God? It might be that God, if he chose, and you would be a spirit being at this point, be able to go where God lives and to experience what God sees. You would spend a day with God. And the purpose of this message is to show what it is like where God lives. What it's like to look over God's shoulder at the many active, constant responsibilities that he has. Exhilarating responsibilities. Things that could be very, very inspiring. I wish that I could be in the position of somebody that was invited to spend a day with God. Now, it could be that that possibly could come up for anybody, knowing that we have eternity to live. It might be just unlimited amounts of time. Anyway, 2 Kings is where Elijah rode in a chariot to heaven. When we talk about heaven, there are actually three different types of heaven. There is God creating the heavens and the earth. There is the sky, the firmament, called the heavens. And then, of course, there is somewhere in outer space God's throne. That's called heaven. So you know which is what based on the context, which word fits. But in 2 Kings chapter 2, we see where Elijah knew that his time was up. He was not going to be taken up to the heaven where God is, but he was going to be caught up into the atmosphere and then land again on a different part of the earth. And at this point, God was switching him out with Elisha. Elisha was taking Elijah's place. And so we go on to, let's see. Second Kings, chapter 2, in verse, oh my, sorry that I don't have that right here. At any rate, Elisha prayed that he would be blessed by his mentor, and Elijah was willing to do that. And then Elisha said, I would like, if it were possible, a double portion of your Holy Spirit. And Elijah says, wow, that's a tall order. That's a major thing to ask for. But he decided, okay, if it's possible, then God is going to grant that to you. And at that juncture, 2 Kings. Yeah, sorry. Oh, Yeah, in verse 11, Elisha and Elijah talked, and suddenly a chariot of fire appeared with horses of fire and separated the two of them. And Elijah went up by a whirlwind into heaven, not into where God's throne is, but into the sky, disappeared and was located on the earth, from what we can read later. But verse 12, Elisha saw it and he cried out, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. And he saw them no more. This was supernatural. These were not just ordinary horses. They could gain high altitude. And this was not some ordinary mode of transportation. It was a chariot. And it was brilliantly lit, and it was it made a huge impact on those that saw it. And so Elisha crossed back over, and he was amazed that he was able to see one of God's transportation systems that was given for Elijah to cross over. Does this same mode of transportation exist today? We have every reason to believe that anything that God has created like that is still with us. And what is it like to ride in such a chariot? You get the impression that it could be noisy. And one of the things about looking at what God does, who he interfaces with, he likes noise. He loves lightning and thunder. And we'll see that in the book of Revelation. And so Elisha was very, very amazed to see a chariot of fire. He didn't expect that. He didn't know that would happen. But let's go over to Ezekiel chapter 1. Ezekiel chapter 1. To be able to come across a chariot would be, I think, absolutely fascinating. In Ezekiel chapter 1, we read where there is a mode of transportation, and it's very unusual. And with this transportation, this is not adequately described. It's hard to envision exactly what this mode of transportation would be like. In verse 10 of Ezekiel 1, as for the likeness of their faces, each had a face of a man. Each of the four had the face of a lion on the right side. Each of the four had an ox on the left side. And each of the four had the face of an eagle. I can read that, but I cannot tell you exactly what that is. But it was amazing. I can guarantee you that. Verse 11, thus were their faces, and their wings were stretched upward. 2 wings, and one touched one another, and 2 covered their bodies, and 2 went out straight forward. And they went wherever the Spirit wanted to go. And they did not turn when they went. And then later on, it mentions they went straight. And anyway, there was some maneuverability, and this mode of transportation was like nothing that anybody else had ever seen. And if we read down to into verse 13, it says, and the living creatures ran back and forth in appearance like flash of lightning. Again, we'll see lightning and noise and thunder appear. If we go on in the same chapter to verse 24, it talks about, again, this mode of transportation. When they went, I heard the noise of their wings, like the noise of many waters, like a Niagara Falls. If you were to get in, this doesn't say it's a chariot, but some kind of a machine that had versatility, could look in different directions, that incorporated the faces of different beings. I can't imagine what that's like. It sounds maybe asymmetrical to me, unusual, but if God created it, you know that it was perfect. He does things magnificently in his creation. And dropping down to verse 27, last part of it, talks about his appearance, God's appearance there. Realize that Ezekiel and the Apostle John and the Apostle Paul were the only ones that God granted a glimpse into the throne of heaven. So it says in description that verse 27, from his waist upward, there was the color of amber, like gold. That was on the appearance of what God was wearing, and was all around him. And then from the waist down, there was the appearance of fire, reddish fire and brightness all around. And so elaborate clothing that God has, and an elaborate atmosphere, and he's surrounded by these beings. And then there are billions of angels. We say billions, maybe hundreds of billions of angels. We'll read about that in the book of Revelation. But the throne of God is something different than anything we could imagine. It is, all the computers in the world put together could not match the capacity of the mind of God. We can say he's great and he's good, and that's going to be true. We can be correct academically, but to really see it, to be able to experience it, or to go there in vision, as at least a couple people did, it's an inspiration. Now, what if every sentence through the entire Bible talked about the greatness of these creations? Maybe we would become complacent and not value it as highly as we can. When just a few people were able to see it, and their friends were surprised that they were in a daze in some cases and just shaken up with excitement. Anyway, that's just an incredible experience to have. If God invited us to be with him for a day, and he could say, I'm going to take so-and-so right here in Ocala. I'm going to put them in the chariot. And there's nothing to worry about. We're not going to crash. We have total control over this. At 100 miles an hour, 500 miles an hour, 17,000 miles an hour can circle the earth every 90 minutes. Or 1,000,000 miles an hour. Time and distance become unimportant to God. In fact, you could say in a sense that he lives outside of time and space, in that he's able to say statements like, 1,000 years to me are like a day, or a day is like 1,000 years. It's immaterial. It's immaterial. And that, to me, is an exciting life. I've seen people show off their pride and joy. They say, you want to see what I've been working on for the last 5 years? It's right here in the garage. It's a 1958 Corvette. Lifts up the garage door, and you see this glimmering, beautiful red cherry Corvette. It's in mint condition, red and black interior, and just marvelous. And you think, I wonder what this can do in the open highway. And most people will say, yeah, I'd like to take it down to the track and drive it at 5 miles an hour. No, not when you have a chance to experience something, the handicraft workmanship of outstanding auto mechanics to create and rebuild this particular mode of transportation. But that's with today's technology to build a Corvette. With technology in the future, the sky is seemingly the limit. It would be an absolute thrill for the person that was invited to spend a day with God, to sit next to him, maybe even be allowed to pull in the gear shaft up and head into warp speed and just see the planets flying by. All things are possible with God. If we could see God, how great he is, why, I think we would be strengthened. Our faith would be more animated. We would say, yeah, boy, do we have a tiger on our side. Guess what God can do? I've seen his chariot. I rode in it all the way, where? To the throne of God, of course. The opportunity to spend a day with God would have to, of course, include being at and near the throne of God. So what is it like in God's heaven, where he resides, the command center of the universe? Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah had the opportunity in vision to see God. We know they did not go there literally, because it says in John 3:13, no man has ascended into God except for my son, Jesus Christ. But it's significant that they had vision, so they understood. God wanted us to at least have some modicum understanding of what the kingdom of God is like. In Isaiah chapter 6 is a very inspiring glimpse into the throne of God. Chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. Chapter 6, through 1 through 5. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train, or the end of the robe of his temple, robe filled the temple. Above it stood seraphim. These are six winged creatures. Each one had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face. With 2 he covered his feet. And with 2 he flew. And one cried to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. What makes something holy is God's presence in it. And the fact that it was named 3 times is major emphasis. It's more significant than if it were just once mentioned. 3 times. And the earth is full of his glory. But as typically unfolded, Isaiah was shocked. Others were in a daze, having had the experience of vision being there at the throne of God. And it took a while to recover. I remember in the autobiography of Mr. Armstrong, when he was, or even before he came and was called by God, his wife had a dream. And it was all these angels that came together, and somewhere along there, the vision, the picture shook, and the angels disappeared, and then they all came back again, glimmered, and then went away. Anyway, I won't try to interpret that. He even wrote himself, he says 99.9% of the time it's probably some fabrication. And whether or not this was genuine, he says, I leave to others to decide. But I mention it here because after she had that dream or vision or whatever, she said she was in a daze for several days. D-A-Z-E for several, D-A-Y-S, days. And if that were true for her, how much more for prophets that God had invited to be able to have a glimpse of that future. So here Isaiah sees this splendid throne of God, and as we'll know, and sees all the seraphim and all these creatures, and in addition was able to see cherubim, which were beautiful in their own way, but have the oxen-like face, and it was just unspeakable. Paul said that he had a hard time describing it. And these seraphim really surprised Isaiah. Verse 4, and the posts of the door were shaken by the voice of him who cried out, and the house was filled with smoke. And that ties into the way the Israelites had smoke with fire when God was leading the Israelites. And so many things in the Old Testament maybe are established from the New Testament. Like, for example, we know that there are animals today in our world. Are there animals at the throne of God? Well, we know from Revelation 19, for example, that there are horses, or a horse, that will lead Christ down to the earth. And there are other places where horsemen are mentioned. It would appear that there must be some prototype of horse that is going in the spirit world. And then we've seen from Ezekiel the fact that you could have a cherubim or different beings that would have the face of an eagle, a face on another side of a bear, of an ox, and then another of a lion. So does that mean there are chihuahuas in heaven? I don't know. I wouldn't bet against it, but I don't know. But we do know that some animal are represented here. And maybe there are others. I can remember this came up in the class at the Vassar College one time. Nobody knew for sure. And I just raised the question. It's interesting. And if I had a pet that I saw a replica of in heaven, and that pet had tremendous energy, whatever, I would be very, very curious to learn more. Anyway, this is what Isaiah saw, the seraphim especially. And he was shaken. And he says to me in verse 5, "Woe is me! I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of the people that are unclean. For my eyes have seen the King, the host of glory." And he compares himself to God. He says, "I'm so inferior." And so he's just in awe. He's humbled by the fact that there are these incredible creations. They're powerful. They can move and fly like the wind. And they're all at God's throne. He enjoys that. He didn't ever want to be alone. Not only is he creating human beings, but he does create special beings that can live forever, that never get tired, and they never get tired of praising God. And that is one of the descriptions of or qualities of the seraphim, the six-winged. You could call them the part of the angelic realm, but they would be distinctly different in appearance than other angels. So now let's go over to 2 Corinthians 13. This is now Paul's glimpse into the heavens. Now remember that in the book of John, that's where it says that no man's ascended into heaven except Jesus Christ. John 3 and verse 13. And John was the last writer of the Bible. So anything that happens before then could not be activity up at the throne of God. So it was envisioned, it had to be, that the Apostle Paul is writing of his experiences. So it's in Corinthians. 2 Corinthians, you're probably already there. Chapter 13. I think that's... now let's go to chapter 12. Chapter 12, verse 1. "It is doubtless not profitable for me to boast," says Paul, "but I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord." And very modestly, he's talking about himself now, but he doesn't want to just claim that. Verse 2, he says, "I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago, whether in the body I do not know, or whether out of the body I don't know, but only God does. Such a one was caught up into the third heaven." This is where God's throne is. How far away from here is it? We don't know. We don't know. But caught up in the third heaven. "And I know such a man, whether in the body or out of the body, I don't know, God knows." Verse 4. "How he was caught up into paradise," another reference to the throne of God, "and heard inexpressible words." I don't know what language they speak, but it was probably amazing. "Of such a one I will boast, yet of myself I will not boast, except in my infirmities. For though I might desire to boast, I would not be a fool. For I speak the truth, and I refrain from lest anyone think of me above that which he sees me to be or hears from me." So he didn't want to be vain about this. The fact that he had that vision, somebody else didn't, was not something to make an issue out of. But I think that God probably gave this to him to give him extra strength whenever he was attacked, vilified, stoned, or thrown into the ocean, left for dead. And he probably thought, I need to encourage Paul. And any time he's up against some horrific trial, he's going to think back to the vision that I gave him of looking at the throne of God and telling him, this is your future eventually, and your home will be here. And he was triumphant. Right before he died, he said in 2 Timothy 4 in verse 8, I know that there's a crown of righteousness laid up for me in heaven, and not just me, but all those that love his appearing. And so it would be an exciting thing, and just would bolster him. One time with Mr. Armstrong, I remember he looked like death warmed over. He just crossed 8 time zones, made it back from the Philippines, and he was tired, but too tired to go to sleep, so he came to watch a basketball game at the college. And then he was walking out, and he looked pretty tired. And I went up to him. I was excited. I said, and I got his attention. He didn't know me from Adam. I said, guess what, Mr. Armstrong? We ran a special TV program on WJR, Detroit, and we got 250 responses. That's a record, and so forth. You know, he was walking like this, and he goes, oh, yeah, and he marched out of there. It's amazing if you're latching onto an idea, a concept, a purpose, or a vision that's constructive, and it's done in humility, but it shows a future, a purpose for living, a purpose for continuing to keep on with the fight that we heard about in the sermonette. That comes from contact with God. That comes from having a vision, getting excited about the future. And it's just inspiring that these things can happen. Now, John wrote the book of Revelation, but let's not forget chapter 14 of John. John chapter 14. Because God is especially interested in us, his saints, and wants us to have a dynamic future with him. And he's already planning things out because God has up in heaven, right next to him, the New Jerusalem that will be brought to the earth. I do not know if it's in a finished state or not. There's a lot of details we don't know. But if you were at the throne, you would be able to see these things. We'll look at some of the references later, but if you got out of that chariot, you would see a sea of glass that would be in front of you, and it would go to God's throne. And there'd be 2 cherubim on each side. And then there would be the mercy seat in between those, where if he so chose, God could sit down. Now, he doesn't need furniture. He doesn't need anything like that we're typically using. But for enjoyment, he will do that. For enjoyment, he has music. He has untold, maybe millions of angels singing in perfect pitch that make quite a powerful sound. And I mentioned the noise. You hear Niagara Falls in the background, or so it seems. And you see lightning in different places, and just a tremendous center of energy and power. And the beings that work with it, the seraphim, the cherubim, they're deliriously happy. They love to praise God. And so you see that. And after getting over your initial shock of what a cherubim or seraphim look like, again, you look at the throne of God. You know that the way the tabernacle in the wilderness was designed back in the Old Testament, Leviticus, Numbers, so forth, is taken from the design in heaven. And so they're exciting forerunners of what God led Moses to do on the earth. Again, I don't want to act as if I have detailed knowledge of these things. But if you and I were able to stand on that sea of glass and converse with God, we would be in awe of all of these creatures all around us. And there are other created beings. They have many eyes in the front and the back of the head. I used to think that was far out. And then I've realized in God's creation, he creates insects and others that have eyes in different places, unusual places. You know, God can do anything. We can't limit what God can do. This God is the God that you and I pray to every day, the one that we have communication with, the one that we hope is going to bless us in our activities. It's good for us to be acquainted with and know more about this being and what he's accomplished with his team. It's just a tremendous inspiration. In John chapter 14, verse 1, let not your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. That represents areas of responsibility, areas of also authority to be used to help edify and guide and protect the human race eventually down the road. And so God is already preparing a house with many mansions. If it were not so, I would not have told you. I go to prepare a place for you, and if I go and prepare a place, then I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may also be, and where I go, you may know the way you know. So the time is going to come when any number of us would have the opportunity to interface with God, both the Son and God the Father. That would be exciting. And if you, in advance, were able to ride in God's chariot and be delivered to God's throne and to see this splendor, see this brilliance of light everywhere, it would be an incredible, incredible experience. In 2 Chronicles 18, we'll take a look at this. 2 Chronicles chapter 18. Chapter 18 and verse 4. Here Jehoshaphat and King Ahab were together. It was kind of a joint political summit, and Ahab wanted to have a military invasion going to Ramoth Gilead. And Jehoshaphat said, well, I'm willing to go, but let's ask the Lord for his input. And Ahab didn't want to do that. He got all these different false high priests together that were going to induce the country into going off to war. And that was going to be a hopeless task because God was not going to bless it. So the question was, shall we go to war against Ramoth Gilead? And all the false prophets said, oh, go up because God's going to deliver it to you. They were very good at telling their leader what they thought their leader wanted to hear. So, oh yeah, we should go to Ramoth Gilead. We're going to win. And Jehoshaphat, verse 6, said, is there not a prophet of the Lord here that we could inquire of him? And the king of Israel said, I don't listen to him. He only prophesies bad news. Jehoshaphat said, no, don't say that, please. And so let's call one of his representatives. And finally, Micaiah was brought forth and appeared before both kings. And Ahab was very, very critical. He says, now listen, only speak the truth. And what Micaiah did was to predict that Israel would win the battle, but they would lose their leader. And so Ahab was very, very upset over that. And what happened was that it unfolded just the way it was prophesied. And Ahab died in the battle. And Jehoshaphat had consulted, though. He wanted to consult and find out what God would think of this. Smart decision. And if we go to 2 Chronicles 18 and verse 18, then Micaiah said, therefore, hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all of this host in heaven standing at his right hand and his left. Here is another glimpse into the throne of God, although not as elaborate as some of the longer descriptions that we've already seen. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing on his right hand and his left hand. That was just a momentary glimpse. But sometimes God has chosen to encourage some of his people and give them a flash, quick look into the future, or look at a divine intervention. And that bolsters the faith of the people. And it will inspire our faith to grow when we can see the greatness of God. It's not enough to say, oh, he's great, he's good, and gloss over it. No, he really, really is beyond what we can imagine. I want to move on to another area to me that's absolutely fascinating. It's part of the responsibility that God has. And if you were looking over his shoulder, you would be really amazed at some of the capabilities that God has. In Jonah chapter 2, we can read when Jonah was swallowed by a great fish, and Jonah was enlightened, shaken, shocked at what happened. He got swallowed by a great fish. And then he was swallowed by that fish. In verse 7 of Jonah, got to get the right book. Sorry. It's in Jonah 2. Hosea, Jonah chapter 2. It says, when my soul fainted within me, I remembered the Lord, and my prayer went up to you, into your holy temple. That's where Jonah's prayer went, and that's where our prayers go. Unless we have the opportunity to be right there and we can tell God face to face what it is that we need or would like to pray for that we thought we were going to be doing back on earth, but here you've brought us in this chariot, or brought me. So now I can see the prayers coming in. The people that pray to God send their prayers, and they come up, as the book of Revelation says, is like sweet incense into a censer, a huge piece of furniture, a container. And it's all of these prayers come every day. It's in God, he loves to hear from us. And it inspires him, brings an extra layer of happiness to his life when he sees us praying. And yet, if we were to see him face to face, we could convey our thoughts differently. But Jonah prayed, and he knew that his prayers were going to God. He says, and they went up to you, verse 7, to your holy temple. They didn't just go to the ceiling and stop. If there was any feeling behind them, they made it for millions of miles. We don't know. It could be that. Maybe longer. Up to the temple of God. And there God receives them. One of the most amazing things about God is he has such an ingenious, undeveloped, or so it seems, or let's rephrase that, just a matchless mind, just full of abilities. It says in Psalm 147 and verse 3 that God knows the name of every star in the universe. How do you know that? Okay, there's 1, 2, 3. Oh, 3's over here. Okay, let's start again. 1, 2, 3. And you got the whole sky to count up. I mean, nobody's ever done that. It'd be utterly impossible. And if you tried it with the Hubble telescope, it'd be the biggest lost cause that ever happened. So God has an incredible ability to look. He can know when a sparrow falls to the ground. He can count the hairs on somebody's head and skip all the dandruff. He can do that. He's God. He's powerful. It is a small thing for him. And imagine seeing the prayers. I mean, how do you see a prayer? Maybe in vision or whatever. You could see the prayers coming in from all over the earth to God's throne. And how can he answer all of them? In a split second, he could do that. You see, if you're in Australia and you're praying to God, and I'm in Florida and I'm praying to the same God, how can he hear both of us at once? Have you ever had the experience where two people tried to talk to you at the same time? Neither one would slow down. And I get a headache. I can't follow two conversations. Maybe women can do that, but I don't know how. But if so, it's a gift. But I can't. But if we were on opposite ends of the earth, and we're praying, and our prayers go up to the throne in heaven, God can sort it out. He's not going to say, well, listen to this person. Oh, better listen to this person. Oh, no, where did those other 100 prayers go? Oh, well, I hope they're in the censer. No, we'll dig them out later. No, he is able to process everything. He's God. You see, years before when I knew some about the Bible, I figured God was great. And I would say, oh, yeah, he's so great, he can answer a prayer. But how about 100 million of them at the same time, possibly? We are so microscopic and yet so important to God, and he is so powerful, and he can do so many things. How do you normally, if I knew this, I might say, well, I'll pray to God, but if I know other people are praying, I'll wait till they're done. No, it doesn't work that way. So we've looked at the act of transportation that can exist, a fiery chariot. We can consider that there are other modes of transportation, and there are other beings with wings that can fly. I haven't talked about one unique group, the 24 elders. 24 elders. And they have responsibilities. They have, well, let's go over there. Revelation chapter 4. Revelation chapter 4. And poor Apostle John, he's describing dragons and eyes that are flying and cherubim, seraphim, all of these different creations of God, and trying to keep up with it all and write accurately of what he's looking at, even though he's never seen it before. And where do you have the vocabulary for some of these beings? So in chapter 4 and verse 1, after those things I looked, and behold, a door standing open in heaven. The first voice which I heard was a trumpet speaking with me, saying, come up here. I'll show you the things that must come to place after this. Immediately I was in spirit, and behold, a throne set in heaven, and one sat on the throne, and he who sat on it was like a jasper and a sardius stone in appearance. And there was a rainbow around the throne. Now, I don't know for sure, but this throne, I thought for years, rainbow, it's going to be an arch. But if you've got a rainbow and it circles the throne, or does it? Well, that would be an unusual appearance. In the appearance, like an emerald. Around the throne were 24 thrones, and on the throne I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white robes, and having crowns of gold on their head. The high honor, they must have been in areas of responsibility. And from the throne proceeding lightnings and thunders and voices. And 7 lamps of fire were burning before the throne. Is that a menorah, a candle holder? Very well could be. 7 lamps on fire were burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. It's one thing to say, yeah, 7 spirits of God, I know they're in Revelation 4. Well, what exactly do they do? Well, I see through a glass darkly. I don't know. It's inspiring, though. And these 4 living creatures, verse 8, having 6 wings, were full of eyes around and within. You're not going to sneak up on them. And they do not rest day and night, saying what we heard from Isaiah, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. And whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to God, him who sits on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him who sits on the throne and worship him who lives forever and ever. They say, you are the worthy, O Lord, to receive glory, honor, and power. For you recreated all things, and by your will they were in existence and created. And it doesn't stop there. And it says, I saw on the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll, written inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a strong angel proclaim with a loud voice, who is worthy to open the scroll and to loose its seals. And no one in heaven or on the earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or look at it. So I wept much until he was reminded that, verse 5, one of the elders said, "Don't weep. Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David," this is Jesus Christ, "has prevailed to open the scroll and loose its 7 seals and reveal end-time prophecy." And there is praise from the angels that Christ is worthy. And so they talk about it in verse, and echo what God has said in chapter 5 and verse 10. The saints will be priests, kings and priests with God. That'll be us. And again, being with God, you're able to see these hosts of angels and hear their music. Music has always been a big part of heaven. If you go back to Ezekiel and Isaiah and read about Lucifer before he turned into Satan, he was a musician. He could sing and he could play an instrument. And now he can still create music, but it's perverted. What he built and established back before he turned against God, that had to be phenomenal music. And he had special ability there. And these angels are pitch perfect. And when you ever see, like in Barbershop Harmony, people ring a chord, they sing in sync. It's not just enough to sing on the same note, but if you inhale and release your breath, all 4 of you, if you're doing a 4-man quartet, you release the air, they say, at the same rate and with the same intensity, and you make your mouth into a circle, and everybody's is the same size, and they sing all from the same diaphragm spot. It takes practice. They're doing everything the same. You get a sound like you've never imagined. And if it's in an auditorium, you'll get an after ring. That sound will hit the ceiling, and then there can be a split second where there's a continued extension of a chord that's ringing. Anyway, it's a powerful phenomenon, and to be able to hear that with protected hearing, I guess, is a tremendous experience. And the angels love it, and they sing to God all the time. And the 24 elders here, they've cast their crowns in front of God. We don't know what they do. They could be advisors. God could consult with them if he wanted. I'm thinking of doing X. What do you think of it? It might be everybody knows it's a perfect idea, terrific, but maybe it would be better to do it on the other side of the world or whatever. There's opportunity for input. The nature of God is to invite input when there's time for it. He would talk to his friend Abraham. Well, what do you think? I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Probably. What's your opinion? How would you do it? Could have asked that. And it just bantered back and forth. At one point, after the golden calf, God said, "That's it. I'm not going to bless these people. They're not going to be coming into the promised land. That's it. I'm going to let them die, and I'll start a new nation with you, Moses." Moses said, "Oh, no, that's not a good idea." Why? Not a good idea because all of the enemies of Israel, they'll laugh and say, their God can't do much. Yeah, he got them out of Egypt, but they fizzled out in the wilderness, and then he put them all to death. And so it was a bad experiment. You need to come with us and follow Molech or some of these other gods, false gods. And instead, God listened to Moses. Moses said, "You don't want to do that. I mean, you can. Wouldn't be wrong. You're not breaking any of your laws. But if you do it a different way, then they'll learn some important lessons. Then they can be redeemed." And God decided to follow the advice of Moses. It wasn't what he initially thought. He's not interested in indiscriminate yes men. He wants people that are real. They'll tell him what's real. You're probably that way. And so it was very important for that friendship to function in a respectful way, and God is happy to do that when there is opportunity. He will consult with people that are close to him. And so that leads me to another area. I talk about the prayers that come to God's throne. I did not turn to Revelation 5, but there are some, it's important to see the significance that God indicates here with the music. It says, verse 9, after looking at each having his harp and golden bowls of incense, which are the prayers of the saints, they sang a new song, saying, you were worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals. You were slain, have been redeemed to us by your blood, and out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation, and have made us kings and priests to our God, and we shall reign on the earth. That is, to me, very exciting, because it's one of the places that does talk about music. And so much communication is in song. It's be a tremendous experience. Now, let's go over to Revelation 22. To me, this might be the most remarkable activity of all. Certainly, it is extremely important. Let me read this verse. And as I do, ask yourself, do I see how critically important this is? What a challenge it is. Maybe for God, maybe not, but certainly would be overwhelming for us. In Revelation 22 and verse 12, and behold, I am coming quickly, says Christ, and my reward is with me, to give every one according to his work. He goes on, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. And God would have the last word on how the teachings of the Bible culminate. So, in verse 12, the beginning part, I come quickly, my reward is with me, to give everyone according to his work. Does God create us and then evaluate us according to our works? Of course he does. Does he reward us according to our works? He promises that he will. Now, does that mean that we have to earn our salvation? No. It's by God's grace, his mercy, his Spirit, his forgiveness. However, our efforts do matter. God doesn't know yet which room in the mansion that we saw in John 14. He does not know where we will fit in yet. Probably not. He's never told us anyway. And he's got to figure out exactly what our reward is going to be. Do we rule over 6 cities or 7? It's up in the air. A different number. God is evaluating us to know what he can give us. It's so important. He rewards us according to our works. Now, I mentioned that if you were with the 24 elders, or if you were with God in heaven, and he turned to you and said, okay, I'm supposed to reward according to so-and-so's works. Any idea how you would do it? What? Me? Evaluate another person? What, pass eternal judgment on them? No, no, no. What are their works in the millennium? If they have pursued God, God could say to this person, what do you think would be their reward? Could you do it? Oh, no, I can't do it. I don't even begin to have the facts. Well, God does have the facts. And I could see, I would find it amusing or fascinating if I could stand next to God and say, what are you going to do with these people? They did this right and that wrong, fought in this war and whatever it was. What's your criteria? And he will go through it. Well, they did keep the commandments of God. They did try to have a good attitude. They worked with other people. Now, you think, well, this is an interesting concept. This is for God. But maybe billions from years from now, or less or more, God says, you know, I've been rewarding people according to their works for a long time. It's your turn now. He wouldn't do that unless we had the ability. Will we? I don't know. But God is forever expanding. In Isaiah 9, 6, and 7, we've covered this. God is expanding his government and administration, and with that comes more people to hold that up, and with that, more responsibility. God loves to share decision-making and life with people that he can trust, that are loyal, that are on the same wavelength as he is. So I can raise more questions than we could answer in this series. But we can be excited for the fact that not only does God know what he's doing, he has all power, he's omnipotent, he's omniscient. It means he knows every thought. I don't know what kind of a computer-like mind he's got. I know he's great, but I don't begin to know. I don't know the half of it. I don't know the fourth of it. And yet, he's there, and he says at times, I'm at your disposal. I'll help you if you'll establish a relationship with me. I will care for you. You know, if you're excited about life here now, what's it going to be like when you have 120G technology? What if you get to the point where you can get in a chariot and cross the Milky Way in a matter of seconds? You know, God has that kind of an ability. Remember, he died, was buried, appeared to his disciples. Don't touch me, he said. I haven't gotten to my Father in heaven yet. And yet, by the end of the day, he had been there and come back. Wouldn't that be incredible to be able to travel that way? Oh, by the way, not get old, not get tired, not get feeble, be able to jump buildings with a single bound if he wanted, because he'd be part of the God family. And more importantly, teaching, Isaiah 30, verse 20, helping, encouraging. These are things that lay in front of us. God wants us to. He makes us a kingdom of priests. Revelation 5, verse 10. There are so many scriptures that talk about the future. We're going to be excited and busy doing worthwhile material, and just it goes on. And I remember somebody saying one time, I really like being alive. And he says, I can't wait to test drive this one particular vehicle that I bought, and that's going to be Monday. And on Tuesday, I meet with these other people. We're going to do this church project and so forth. Yeah, I can't wait for that. I can't wait for the Feast of Tabernacles. That's months from now. And I can't wait for this and that. And life can be continual excitement and interest. I'm not saying we're at a fever pitch forever and ever at a high level, but there is so many meaningful activities that God is involved with, that he can include us with. So we have a dynamic future. If you were to go with God for a day and see how he answers prayers, to see the prayers come in, to see how he assimilates those in a second, knowing what's going on everywhere, answering a widow over here and rejoicing in some activity, an athletic activity over here, and comforting somebody else all at the same time. I don't know how you can do that. As a spirit being, it's hard for me to figure it. But with God, all things are possible. With God, all things are possible. That's our partner. Let's take advantage of it. Let's not be like the proverbial person that said, yeah, I decided to work for Elon Musk. He's wealthy. And between him and me, we own enormous amounts of stock. Mostly him, but between the two of them, because I bought one share. And to be able to claim that is an actual fact. And too many times when people have opportunity like that, they waste it. And if Elon Musk wrote a check out, he said, how much would you like? Whatever you want. Ooh, I'll write a check. Write me a check for $20. Well, I could write you a check for the universe. No, 20. That's all I'm going to attempt in this lifetime. I'll play it safe. Silly. Well, I think that we can see that the expanse of the throne is so exciting and challenging, that providing and pointing to a very active, different life. Life is a spirit being, a life that's able to be in sync with God. You know, that's what one of the ultimate things. When we look for what we face for the future, the long-range future is so blindingly bright. If we manage the present, the future looks incredibly good. And there are wonderful things to enjoy even in this life. So let's take advantage of our connection with God. Let's be thankful that we can study about God and learn more what it's like to be God, and know that that's our future destiny, and that He wants to treat us like a VIP, very important person. So don't be surprised if you get a chariot someday and say, it's time to move on to the next level with your brothers and sisters in the faith.